Over 4,400 American soldiers never came home from Iraq, and more than 2,400 never returned from Afghanistan. This is the story of one of them, a man who walked away from fame, from millions of dollars, from the bright lights of the NFL to fight for something he believed was bigger than himself. This is the story of Pat Tillman. Chapter 1: The Star. Who walked away before the war, before the uniform. There was the field and the sound of a crowd chanting one name, Pat Tillman. Born in Fremont, California in 1976, Tillman wasn't the biggest or strongest player, but what he lacked in size, he made up for in fire. Coaches said he played like every down was his last. Teammates remembered him as fearless, the kind of man who'd run straight through a wall if that is what it took to win. At Arizona State University, Tillman became a standout safety. He led his team to victory after victory, earning the title of Pac-10 Defensive Player of the Year. He wasn't just athletic, he was brilliant, curious, deeply thoughtful. Professors and coaches alike said he saw life differently. He questioned things. He looked for purpose. In 1998, the Arizona Cardinals drafted him into the NFL. By his third season, he had set team records for tackles and earned national recognition. At just 25 years old, he had everything: fame, fortune, a loving fiancée named Marie, and the promise of a long, successful career. Then came September 11th, 2001. Tillman watched the attacks unfold from his home in Arizona. Like millions, he felt shock and grief. But for him, something else stirred a calling. Friends said he became quieter in the weeks that followed. He started reading books about courage, about sacrifice, about what it meant to serve. He told one reporter, "Somewhere inside, we've got to believe in something bigger than ourselves." In May 2002, at the height of his career, Pat Tillman made a decision that stunned the sports world. He turned down a $3.6 million contract and enlisted in the U.S. Army. No press conferences, no cameras, no public statements, just conviction. His younger brother Kevin joined him. Two professional athletes walking away from the American dream to fight in a war that had only just begun. During training, drill sergeants expected the NFL player to quit. He didn't. He trained harder than anyone. He learned to sleep in the mud, march in the cold, and follow orders like any other soldier. By 2003, he had become an Army Ranger, assigned to the elite 75th Ranger Regiment. Those who served with him said he never asked for special treatment. He didn't want to be Pat Tillman, the celebrity. He wanted to be Sergeant Tillman, just another Ranger. When asked why he did it, his answer was simple: because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. He had left the stadium lights behind, but the same fire still burned, only now. It was for something greater than victory. Chapter 2: From the Stadium to the Battlefield. The roar of the stadium was gone. In its place came the sound of boots hitting dirt, the metallic clang of rifles, and the shouted cadence of drill sergeants. Pat Tillman and his brother Kevin entered the U.S. Army with no special treatment, no headlines, and no shortcuts. The celebrity life vanished overnight. Their days began before sunrise, filled with sweat, exhaustion, and silence. Pat's instructors quickly realized he wasn't there to make a statement, he was there to serve. He pushed himself harder than anyone, carrying the heaviest loads, volunteering for the toughest drills. When others slowed, he kept going. When others complained, he stayed quiet. By the end of basic training, the NFL star had transformed into Sergeant Tillman, lean, hardened, and focused. He earned a spot in the 75th Ranger Regiment, one of the most elite fighting forces in the world. In 2003, Pat and Kevin deployed to Iraq. The heat was unbearable, the air thick with dust. Gone were the clean fields and shining helmets replaced by convoys, checkpoints, and long stretches of nothing. Pat wrote in his journal about what he saw. He questioned the chaos, the politics, and the meaning behind it all, but he never questioned the men beside him. He found purpose not in ideology, but in brotherhood. When his tour in Iraq ended, he could have left the army. Instead, he volunteered for another mission, Afghanistan. Friends back home begged him to quit. They told him he had done enough. But Pat S.'s response was simple: "My job, S, not done." In April 2004, he arrived in Afghanistan, a place of sharp mountains, narrow valleys, and unseen enemies. It was a different kind of war, smaller units, heavier risks, and constant uncertainty. Still, Pat remained calm. He was known for his humor, his humility, and his refusal to act like he was anyone special. He shared rations, wrote to his wife whenever he could, and led by quiet example. Those who served with him later said, "You could tell he was a warrior but also a thinker. He didn't just fight the war, he tried to understand it." Chapter 3, The Last Mission, April 22, 2004. The mountains of eastern Afghanistan were quiet, the kind of quiet that soldiers learn not to trust. Pat Tillman S. platoon was on a routine mission near the village of Spira, close to the Pakistani border. The terrain was brutal, steep cliffs, narrow passes, loose rock everywhere. Progress was slow. Then one of their vehicles broke down, splitting the convoy in two. In the confusion, the platoon leader ordered a small team, including Pat, to move ahead on foot, while the rest stayed behind to recover the damaged vehicle. That decision would change everything. As Pat S. group moved through a dry canyon, gunfire suddenly echoed through the mountains. Dust and smoke filled the air. The men hit the ground, returning fire, unsure where the shots were coming from. In the chaos, another U.S. unit on a nearby ridge saw movement in the canyon and mistook them for the enemy. They opened fire. Machine gun rounds tore through the rocks. Bullets struck the cliffside, sending fragments flying. Pat Tillman stood up, shouting and waving his arms, trying to signal to the other unit to stop. His comrade next to him yelled, "Cease fire! Friendlies!" But the noise, the confusion, and the echo of the valley drowned them out. 3 rounds hit Pat in the head. He fell instantly. He was 27 years old. The gunfire stopped minutes later. The silence that followed was heavier than the battle itself. When his men reached him, there was nothing left to do. They covered his body, knowing the unthinkable had happened. Pat Tillman, the NFL star who gave up millions to serve, had been killed by his own side. At first, the Army told his family and the public that Pat died heroically fighting enemy forces. Newspapers printed headlines about his bravery under fire. But weeks later, the truth came out: it was friendly fire. It was a betrayal, but chaos, the kind of tragedy that war creates, even among those fighting for the same cause. The man who had given everything for honor and duty was gone, lost not to the enemy, but to confusion, noise, and the fog of war. Chapter 4. The Aftermath. When news of Pat Tillman's death reached the United States, the story spread like wildfire. Headlines read, "NFL star killed in Afghanistan." He was hailed as a national hero, a man who gave up fame and fortune to serve his country, killed in a firefight with the enemy. The truth, however, was far more complicated. For weeks, the Army maintained the original account, that Tillman had died defending his fellow soldiers in a fierce battle. There were ceremonies, speeches, and tributes across the country. The president mentioned his sacrifice. The media called him a symbol of American courage. But behind the scenes, something didn't add up. Members of Pat S. platoon, the men who had been there, began to question the official version. The bullet wounds, the timing, the positioning, none of it matched the report, and the soldiers were told to stay quiet. When the truth finally reached Pat S.'s family, it broke them. They learned he had been killed by the enemy. He'd been shot by his own unit. The word friendly fire entered the story, and with it came shock, anger, and betrayal. Pat S.'s mother, Mary Tillman, refused to stay silent. She pushed for answers, demanding honesty from the same government her son had died serving. Her voice was steady, but filled with grief. "The truth may be painful," she said, "but lies are deadly." Congress opened investigations. Testimonies revealed that the military had known it was friendly fire within days, yet delayed the truth to preserve the hero narrative. To many Americans, it was more than a mistake. It was a moral wound. The Tillman family attended the memorials, the flag ceremonies, the interviews, but none of it brought peace. For them, honor meant truth. And Pat S.'s greatest legacy, they believed, would not be how he died, but how he lived with integrity, with conviction, and with a heart that refused compromise. By the time the investigations ended, the official story had changed, but the pain never really did. The soldier who gave up everything for honesty and duty had been met, in the end, with silence and confusion. Chapter 5. The legacy Pat Tillman-esque story didn't end in that Afghan canyon. In many ways, that S where it began. When his death and the truth behind it finally came to light, America saw more than a soldier. They saw a man who refused to live without purpose, even when it led him straight into danger. He was more than headlines, more than a tragedy. He was an idea that courage is not about glory, but conviction. After his passing, Pat S. friends and family created the Pat Tillman Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping veterans and their families pursue education and leadership. Each year, they select Tillman scholars, men and women who embody the same sense of service and humility that defined Pat S. life. Through them, his name continues to make a difference, not on the battlefield, but in classrooms, hospitals, and communities around the world. His widow, Marie Tillman, became a quiet symbol of grace and strength. She kept his memory alive not through speeches or fame, but through action supporting causes that reflected who he was, grounded, honest, and brave. Every year, thousands of runners gather for the Pat S. Run in Tempe, Arizona, a 4.2-mile race that ends on the 42-yard line of Sun Devil Stadium, where Tillman once played. It is not just a race. It is a reminder. People of every age, color, and belief come together to honor the man who walked away from comfort to stand for conviction. Even in the military, his name carries weight. You'll still hear Rangers talk about him not like a celebrity, but like a brother who set the standard. He proved that courage doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs action. Pat Tillman never came home. But his story did. It lives in every soldier who serves with integrity, in every person who chooses purpose over comfort, and in every moment when doing the right thing feels harder than walking away. He once said, "Somewhere inside, we've got to believe in something bigger than ourselves." For Pat, that belief cost him everything, but in the end it gave his life meaning that will never fade. Epilogue never came home. He was one soldier, one life among thousands. But in his choices, Pat Tillman became something larger than the war he fought in. He wasn't perfect. He questioned, doubted, and searched for truth even when the truth hurt. He believed in duty, but also in honesty. And that belief made his story more than one of loss. It made it a story of integrity. Pat Tillman never came home, but his courage did. It lives on in the classrooms funded by his foundation, in the runners who cross that 42-yard line every spring, and in every person who still believes that one voice, one action can matter. In a world full of noise, his silence speaks louder, because sometimes the truest form of bravery is not the fight you win, but the fight you choose to begin. If you've watched this far, thank you. History isn't only written in victories, but in the echoes of those who fought and fell long after the war was already lost. Stay healthy, subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one. And if you have an idea for another untold story, share it in the comments. Your voice keeps history alive, so the silence never wins again.